and welcome back to the Book Marketing Tips and Author Success Podcast. So I sound like I'm laughing because I was kind of laughing. This show was born out of kind of a crazy idea that I had. We get so many comments from listeners that say that we have such great chemistry and we sound like we always get along. And we do. I mean, we really do. But we don't always agree on stuff. And one of the things that this disagreeing on stuff has really taught us is that, you know, it's very, very good to have a sounding board that you can trust, who will be really honest with you. And I think and Amy, you and I talked about this, there's definitely a lesson in that, and certainly enough of a lesson to put together a show.
Yeah, I thought this was a really fun idea because normally we're so focused on but I mean, again, yeah, we're so focused on, okay, like the tips, but there is surprisingly a lot of great lessons and tips that came from this, even though it started off as just a fun, hey, we should do this for the listeners, you know, because we get a lot of wonderful comments from everybody saying that they like the energy on the show and things like that, and that they like the tone and kind of how we approach this. So this will be hopefully entertaining for y'all.
Yeah. And I think, so the first one, I think, it's worth starting here is the podcast. So, and just so you know, the title of the show should actually be All the Ideas Penny Had and Why Amy Said No. Like that's going to be that's actually the better show idea. But the podcast, so I came up with the podcast in January, I think, of 2020. And Amy immediately hated the idea. But I sent her a microphone, like literally, folks, I got on Amazon and I'm like, okay, I'm sending you a microphone, get on board, get on the podcast train is leaving. And I think you can kind of tell in the first couple of shows, and not that Amy was always great, don't get me wrong, but I think you can kind of tell in the first couple of shows that Amy was like, she was just like, oh my gosh, I feel like somebody's just like locked me in a basement and told me you have to record a podcast to get your freedom. Sorry, now I totally went down the truth.
Yeah. It's a very Hannibal Lecter moment, you know, it puts its lotion on its skin.
And to be fair, I'm kind of an idea bunny. So if you ever met us in person, like Amy will tell you, right? Like sometimes I'm like, oh my God, I have all these ideas. And it's really good that she reins me in the majority of them, but she was wrong about the podcast. But Amy,
yeah, absolutely.
So talk about so I'm sharing the idea. Amy's going to share the lesson. So what's the lesson to our listeners though in this?
Well, it's the lesson is Amy needs to be more open-minded. No, just kidding. But yeah. But I think new ideas are always, I mean, it's good to always come up with new ways and part of that too, I will say I was a little jaded because we're always trying to come up with new ways to engage authors, give you new information, let you in on what we feel is important in the industry, things like that. But I am definitely a logistics type of a person. Like, how are we going to maintain this? What is it going to require week to week? What are we going to have to, what is our quality insurance type of a thing? Like, how can we make sure that if we put this out there, we are doing the very best version of this that we can? And I think, that is kind of the lesson that like always push yourself, but don't forget about the long term, make sure that when you do come up with a good idea, that you figure out how to keep growing from that good idea once it takes off, plan it out, do the brainstorm, but also think about, okay, what are the potential challenges? How are we going to get around that? What is the time, commitment that I need to do? Can we handle that? Things like that. And if you figure all those things out, I think, Penny, every time we've brainstormed a new idea, when we've kind of checked all those boxes and can make it all make sense, they usually work in our favor. They usually end up being some of our better ideas, for sure.
Well, and one of the things that I did with this is that because I wanted to do it so badly is I actually mapped out a whole bunch of shows so that we weren't like sitting in front of the, sitting in the Zoom
She had like
room.
a proposal to give me. She's like, okay, so here's where I see us in 6 months. Like, It's true, but it was great though, because it made me feel really good about the fact that like, all right, we've got some like killer ideas here. And, even if we only get these shows out and we have a small group of listeners, we're still going to do some good. Obviously, we've got a ton of listeners. We've put out a ton of content. So we definitely built from that. But even what we started with, I felt you made me feel really confident that even if that's as far as it went, we were going to do a good service to the publishing community and authors by putting out what you had outlined initially.
And I think that to the point of that outline, if you can't outline an idea, that it's probably not an idea, right? So I think because as authors, we always want to add new things to our plate. Like, oh, I want to do this, and oh, I want to do that, and I want to do this. And those are all great. But if you can't outline it, it's kind of like jumping on TikTok. Like, I want to get on TikTok. Well, why do you want to get on TikTok? Well, everybody's on TikTok. Well, that's not a good reason. Right.
Right.
It's kind of like it's kind of like TikTok is like indoor plumbing. Like everybody has indoor plumbing. I mean, with the exception of Amy, who's not on TikTok. We love her for that. Like, I mean, right? At TikTok, like you have to really, if you cannot articulate a plan, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be finite and drilled down completely and all this other stuff. But if you cannot articulate some kind of a plan, it's probably not really an idea, right?
Right, exactly. If we only had 6 ideas for shows and couldn't come up with anything else, we had no business starting a podcast.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, like you said, I mean, we have lots of feedback. We have lots of listeners. People really love it. I mean, I was at the IBPA conference last week and people came up to me and said, oh my gosh, I love your podcast. So that is, not that we necessarily needed that validation, but it's always nice when people are, that people are listening.
I absolutely did it because I find this terrifying.
Amy does not like, what's so funny is when I was doing that IBPA class last week, I'm like, Amy, really, you would have knocked that out of the park, this whole Amazon masterclass that I taught. But I know that that's terrifying to you. So someday, folks, we will get her on the road. That day is not today.
Behind the curtain. Not today.
That day is not today. So the next is the business structure. And this is something that so Amy really likes structure. If you know Amy, she really likes structure. And I am a creative. I do not necessarily like structure, but so, I mean, if you look at like sometimes like when Amy and I are in a room together or whatever, I sent her a screenshot of all the notifications on my phone one day. And Amy was like, you should be in jail.
It's criminal, really.
So, and it's not that my life is a mess, but I wanted authors to feel like I didn't feel like boundaries were going to make authors feel loved and cared for. And one of the things that Amy taught me is that boundaries are actually good for authors. It helps them with structure, and boundaries it doesn't necessarily mean that we're running around saying no to everybody, but boundaries aren't a mean thing. And I think the lesson here is that, and Amy's going to cover the lesson, but first off, you really need somebody in your life, whether that's your editor or somebody in your writing group or whatever, who is not afraid to tell you the flat out truth, or is not afraid to say, Penny, you're not allowed to have 10,000 notifications on your phone. You should go to that. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. I am a big structure fan. So that is probably one of the reasons I don't do well on panels, because, oh my God, no. Like the fact that anything could be thrown at you at any moment, literally, like tomatoes, questions, whatever, like, but truly the structure, when we chatted about it and actually kind of dug into what our clients were saying, the things that they were unsure of, insecurities they had, questions they had, we realized that by adding some additional structure to how we handle client campaigns, we were actually giving them so much more of what they needed by creating a set structure to follow, because we were able to be more proactive about the information we could give them, the guidance, some tips, recommendations, things that we really said like, okay, how are we repeating ourselves over and over again with clients? Because we know that these are some common issues that they run into or questions they have. So adding a bunch of structure and processes to how we manage client campaigns and how we run our authors through, introducing them to the team and things like that, I think has really helped them feel more confident in what we're doing behind the scenes, where their responsibilities start and stop, what they can be doing to support the work that they've invested in. Yeah. You know what I mean? I think it's really blossomed into something beneficial across the board for all of us. And that is something that we regularly get feedback on from our clients, is how much they learn. For those that really want to learn, how much they can potentially learn by working with us, even if, a lot of them will admit it can be a little overwhelming at times, just because, again, this is a complex industry. A lot of them are very grateful to have that information to go back to and read through and build from. And that's been, I'm really proud that we are so generous with our education on that level.
Yeah. Well, but I also think that in an industry that is often very unstructured, that is often because look, it's a creative industry. Obviously it is very, there's people, I hear this all the time from authors that they hire people that don't show up for the work, or they don't, and not delivering on promises, I realize, is not specific to the book industry, but there's not, it's so interesting, because when I was first in this, even though I sort of joke that I don't have structure, but when I was first in this industry, I remember that. So my schedule's very, my call schedule is very planned out. I don't really have the flexibility in my schedule to just jump on the phone with somebody at the spur of the moment. Somebody email like, hey, let's get on the phone and talk about my book today. It's like, I'm usually, my call sheet's usually booked up a week or more in advance, as Amy can attest to. So to that end, that kind of structure, I've always had. And I remember when I was first in the industry, I was at Book Expo America, and there was somebody there, and I don't remember who it was, but somebody there who was like, your business is too structured. And shockingly, this person is no longer in business. However, so my point is that in an industry that is often feels very chaotic, it not only is it good to have somebody, as I mentioned earlier, who can kind of point out when your book needs work or your cover needs work or whatever, all those things, but you also want to create that structure and embrace that structure, because that's the thing that'll really help to move this forward. And we've seen that in the industry, authors who are grateful for the boundaries that we've adapted in the work that we do. And I think it's really a healthy thing.
Right, exactly. And for authors, this applies to sticking to your marketing plan, sticking to your promotion plan, sticking to, coming back and reevaluating your Amazon page and seeing what, updates you can make, double checking your website every few months, giving yourself some sense of structure to where you feel confident that you're not forgetting something and that you're taking care of business. It works both ways.
Yep. That is exactly right. So the next one on the list is the holiday book. So a few years ago, I don't know, time is so weird, but I did how to market your book for the holiday season, right? And it fell kind of flat. It didn't really do that well. And so I had this idea that I wanted to revise it to make it more universally appealing. So not just market your book around the holidays, but market your book, position your book to holidays using whatever, peanut butter and jelly day to July 4th to Valentine's Day to market your book. And I thought this was a great idea. Amy shut it down. But that's going to be my, I'm going to say all of these.
This episode's getting darker.
The further that we go down the list, this episode's getting so dark. Now this book has been partially edited, and I sent it to her and I said, I'm thinking about focusing on this next. And she was like, no, I think that you should focus on, formula. And it felt, and as any author knows, Sometimes you get partially through a project and you don't know whether to kick it to the curb or to keep going, but we keep investing in it because now, maybe it's been partially edited or you have some drafts of the cover or whatever. And making those hard decisions is not easy. But Amy said to me, she said, you really have to focus. She goes, and I want you to articulate more of the lesson behind this, but she said, the thing that really matters to people, that as we've seen over the years and various editions of my Amazon optimization books, are the Amazon optimization books, right? And so, but I was itching to do something new. And as authors, we know, that we have this itch, right? We want to always be producing things and creating, we're creatives for a reason. And so from that conversation, now I'm doing a workbook. So I'm still disappointed about the holiday book. Don't get me wrong. I'm not really, but now I'm creating a workbook as a partner book to Formula. So Amy, talk a little bit about what that lesson is, or that lesson for us was in this case.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely about making hard decisions about where you need to focus your time, because there's only so many hours in a day, only so many days in a week. I mean, I know I can speak to Penny's schedule, but I think most of the people listening also aren't just writers. You're also juggling a lot of things, whether it's other things for your career or just life in general, and like you said, success leaves clues. And the feedback that we get, and this very much kind of ties into the podcast in a lot of ways, Penny, the feedback that we get from the Amazon books, just nothing else can compete with that. And certainly not the feedback we got, unfortunately, for the holiday book, because I loved working on that book, because I know I brainstormed a lot of fun ideas with you to, the examples, recommendations, and things like that. And that was a really fun creative project for me personally as well, because we get to sit there and come up with creative marketing ideas. But, when we chatted about it, the reality is the difference is that book really has a more narrow market, because if you want that book, it's because you're looking for a lot of extra homework, like that's just the reality. Like if that's the position you're in and you need a lot of ideas for additional marketing you need to be doing on your own, then that's the book for you. And it's there and y'all should check it out for sure. But the Amazon books just have a broader appeal because everybody is trying to figure out the Amazon beast, and it affects your bottom line. It affects your sales potential. There's just so many ways that Amazon, has its grip on this industry. It's just something that is more of a universal need, I think, across the board for authors. Whereas, the holiday book, yes, it's a great fit for people that are really looking for those extra tips and extra, direction in terms of marketing. But, we all only have so much time. So are you going to spend time trying to figure out Amazon? Or are you going to spend time, you know what I mean? It's a tough decision.
Well,
but I think
go ahead.
Yeah,
sorry.
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I just think the Amazon book is definitely something that is a definite service to authors in this industry for sure.
Well, and you really have to pick your battles. And I think just to kind of translate this even a little bit more, not to go too far down the rabbit hole, but when I'm on the phone with authors and they have projects that they want to work on, or maybe prior books that they've done that have done really, really well, and they ask me what they should focus on, and I will tell them flat out, you should focus on the thing that is selling the best. And I had a hard time taking that advice myself. So I completely understand how foreign this must seem when I say this to authors, because you're like, well, I want to focus on my latest thing. And there is, when you start, if you have multiple books out, there's always, as Amy said, success leaves clues, right? So there's always one book or maybe several that are doing really, really well, right? And maybe it makes sense to, if those are older books, maybe it makes sense to revamp them and re-release them. In fact, somebody from the Hot Sheet, Jane Friedman's paid newsletter, which is absolutely worth subscribing to, was interviewing me about rebranding and re-releasing books. And I said, I absolutely completely agree that that is something, if creating a workbook or creating a companion book or something like that isn't something that you can do for a book that has done well, think about, re-releasing it, because that's a potentially a big success driver, to focus and really put your attention in the things that are selling, which is a lesson that I needed to learn myself. Um, so the next one, this is really kind of interesting, because as marketing people, we always tell you to know your market.
Right.
This is one of those things where we're really opening up the kimono on this one. So whenever I have a new book coming out, we always do bonuses. And I love doing these bonuses. Like, we have tote bags, we have these writer working door hangers, we have these ask me about your book decals for your laptop, whatever. And even though, and we do these promotions, like, oh, Penny has a new book out, blah, 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 send us your receipt. Even though I sell a lot of books, what's really funny is, and I always say this to Amy, people just don't want the free stuff. It's really kind of weird. But I think, and this is, and I will still ask Amy the next time we have a book coming out to do bonuses and things like that, because I love doing them. And I have all this swag. So listen, if you bought my book and you didn't get one of the promos, send me your receipt and I'll send you the swag. I have so much free swag still. But the audience really wants the knowledge. They don't want the swag. And at first I took it personally, because of course that's what we authors do, right? Like, everybody hates me. But then, the books were selling really well, especially during this promo period. And so few people were sending in their receipt. I mean, Amy, we talk about this a lot, right?
Right. Yeah. Knowing what your market wants and doesn't want, it's huge, because you can waste a lot of time and money if you don't focus on what matters to them. And I think we see this a lot for everybody listening. This translates into a lot of different areas. I mean, think of how much time you can waste on social media, Penny, if you don't take the time to actually do the research on what your demographic is interested in, entertaining, what do they find useful. You could spend so much time posting content that doesn't get you anything in return because of that. And I think same thing when it comes to your Amazon book page, understanding why your readers are fans of the genre you write in, and what is popular and what is trending, and speaking to that, so you really can show them that you're paying attention to what interests them. I mean, I think this whole pay attention to your market translates to so many different areas of what authors have to do to compete nowadays. And we understand it's like having a second job, marketing and promoting your book, but again, taking a little time to really dig into what the benefit is for your reader versus what's easy for you or what you find interesting, or, you know what I mean? All those things, it's hard to do that because it's like, well, I want this to be fun for me too, like Penny's tote bags, but truly, but yeah, pay attention to what, and also, we've said this before, success leaves clues. We've talked about this in other shows for different reasons, but, sign up for other authors' newsletters, get a feel for what's going on in your genre or for your topic for authors that are seeing continued success. And I guarantee you'll kind of start to figure out, just by watching what they do and consuming some of their content, what readers are interested in. And it's a great way to kind of, those light bulb moments, like, wow, I hadn't thought of that, but clearly, this is working for this person. How can I make this my own?
Yeah. Yeah. Let it inspire you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let it inspire you to do. And that's something that, that's something that it's hard to do for a lot of authors, just because we spend so much time with our nose in a book or with our nose in our Word doc or, creating new worlds or writing, whatever, that we don't really, and that's one of the reasons why writers conferences are also really good, because it really gets you out of your norm and gets you an opportunity not just to network with people, but just to kind of get a sense of what other people are doing and what, you know. So the final one, and this one absolutely comes with a trigger warning because it's so funny. So I created this Amazon video series. I loved the idea of a video series. Everybody has a video series, so we have to have a video series too. And when I was putting this show together, I was cracking up because I was remembering how this was, it wasn't really funny. So it was more of a trauma laugh, maybe. Like dark. That which does not kill us makes us stronger laugh. The Amazon video series. So the idea was that every aspect of the book was then deep dived into a video series, right? And in theory, so this goes back to how I should have planned. I should have planned for this like I planned for the podcast. And this is how we as authors, as creatives, we get all these ideas, we throw them out there, and we don't bother, like, take that drive down the road and see where this video series is in 6 months and 8 months, when you have to keep updating it every single time Amazon has a mood swing and decides to change something, right? And I'll let Amy go into what a nightmare this was on the back end of this, because that was just a huge nightmare. In fact, I guess it was like 6 months ago. She was like, "Can we just delete all this stuff now? Is that okay? Can we just?" It was like she was getting out of a bad relationship or something. It was so funny.
We had to sage the room.
We had to sage the room. But so, this is one of those things where in theory, and I think different than the podcast, because the podcast is it's kind of like a living, breathing thing. Like we'll do a show, like we've done shows in season 1 that are clearly, most of the majority of the content is still relevant, but some of it gets outdated because Amazon changes things, right? But with the video series, it was, it takes time. So it takes time to prep the videos, and you create you have to be on camera, or you create a PowerPoint, or you do whatever walkthrough that you do. And we kept, we were getting emails from people like, "Oh, well, this one is outdated." And it just started to get to be a complete nightmare, not to mention what you went through on the back end of the website, and Amy doing all this, who's not, she's probably more of a web designer than a lot of people out there at this point, but
under duress. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it was definitely, this was a good lesson in, for those of you, I'm sure there are people listening also that have thought of ways to branch out from just their book brand, which we highly encourage, especially if you write nonfiction. You have to be more than just your book. But, definitely fiction as well. Longevity means, building worlds beyond the pages is, that's a big part of it too. But yeah, this was a beast in terms of logistics. Membership plugins and the cost and updating the cost. And then of course, when you have anything that's paid, you also run promos with discounts and keeping up with those. And shout out to anybody listening who was a video member. Like, you're one of the OGs. If you are still with us, that's incredible. Yeah. Thank you for going down that road with us at one point. But yeah, I agree with you, Penny. It's definitely, there are some projects that seem like a great idea at the beginning, but we definitely plan for the podcast a lot better. And the podcast has fewer moving parts. I think you are also much more generous with your time than I am also, so when it came to doing video, Penny's always like, "I'm always game to do video." And I'm thinking she's hiding a twin somewhere that we don't know about, because I don't know who this other Penny is that has time to keep up with what that particular element of our platform required. It is very different from the podcast, like you said. And so this is like, for anybody listening, this is a lesson in definitely thinking through not just getting it up, but the requirements for keeping it going. And I think a lot of authors, Penny, struggle with that when it comes to their newsletter, and why a lot of people hesitate to start a newsletter because of that expectation, of like, oh my gosh, what will I have to say? What do I, you know what I mean? And then living up to it every time. And, we often recommend maybe you start monthly. And if that's a lot, do it seasonally to get it going. You know what I mean? But be realistic about how much you can put out there before you go into a new project, because it hurts when you have to back out of something that you put a lot of time and effort into, and it's like, we've tried promos and things that people aren't always as excited about as we hope they would be. And that always is a bummer. But this one was one of those that was it was a bummer to let go of it, because the idea of it was very cool, but it got so much bigger than we could possibly manage,
Well, and actually it was a bummer for me. Amy, I'm sure, was very happy because I remember when it's really hard. I mean, I think as creatives, and I always call myself a creative, and Amy is absolutely a creative, even though she hasn't written a book yet, but we're working on that. But, it's really hard to let stuff go, right? It's hard to, even if do you remember when we had the membership site? So we decided we were going to put the videos in this membership site, and the membership site was complicated and everything was complicated. And I think we have to step back at some point and listen to what things are telling you. Right. And it's not that. So I'm not necessarily saying that, well, if you're not getting a lot of likes on your Facebook page, then you should just quit Facebook, or you should quit your newsletter. People, sometimes there are things that you can do to fix it. And believe me, when I tell you, and Amy can attest to this too, once again, trigger warning for Amy, we did everything to try and fix the situation. The outdated nature of that the videos created is not something that we could, that there was no workaround for that. Like, those videos just had to get updated pretty much constantly. Right. But, listen to what something is trying to tell you, because projects that are just not a good fit, or doing something that feels, counterintuitive, like, as marketing people, we all want to create extensions of our books. And, whether you're fiction or nonfiction, I've known some fiction people who say, well, I'm going to create a dedicated page on my website that has a special login that people get when they buy the book. And then they can explore these worlds further and see all this stuff further. But keep in mind that can potentially be a full-time job, right? Something. So,
yeah.
You know what I mean?
Do it right. Yeah. If you're going to do it right. Because Penny, you say it all the time. We mention on the show all the time, like, everything you put out there is your resume.
Yeah.
So you want to be sure you can see it through and meet that bar that's already out there. Because there are very few brand new ideas, if we're being totally honest. You know what I mean? Like, there are some incredible fiction authors out there that have experiences outside of their books that are just mind-blowingly creative, and it doesn't mean, if you don't meet that bar, you shouldn't bother doing it at all. But just know that, readers are sophisticated, and genre fans are very much in tune with all of this, so you don't want to go into something because it sounds fun and interesting and you like the concept of it. You really have to figure out, like, how you're going to execute it to a really high level. Otherwise, it may not be the right project for you.
Well, and part of the issue that I had with these videos is because you and I are both real sticklers for our brand and our reputation, and what we put out there is, we couldn't, there was really, as these videos got outdated, if they weren't updated in a timely fashion, it was a bad reflection.
Right. And absolutely. And then we got to the point where it's like, well, we can't do another promo for this until we get them all update. You know what I mean? So it became this like cyclical pattern of, we have to do X, Y, and Z before we can move forward. And it was just, it was tough.
Well, and then, and a lot of times, like, you would do a video, for example, on, I would do a video on, like, updating your book description or uploading a book to Amazon or whatever it was. Right. And there was maybe one tiny little piece in that video that was outdated that made the entire video outdated, right? So in theory, if I had a big production company, I could go in and just edit out that one little piece that Amazon no longer offered, and then the video would be updated. But it never worked out that way. So I think sometimes you don't really know these things until you get into them, right? Until you're think, oh my gosh, this was such a bad idea. But to the degree that you can, and I'm not discouraging you from the big ideas, because it's the big ideas that people talk about, right? But I think to the degree that you can, take this idea down the road. Take this idea, not necessarily for a test drive, but take it, see if you can take it out on the road, even just mentally, and sort of, kind of envision where it's going to be in 6 months and 8 months and what it's going to require to keep it going. Because this author who has these worlds and this login and stuff, when I talked to her, she was literally doing all this work for the 10 people who had signed up.
Oof.
Right. And that, it's like, well, in theory, we're going to be growing these numbers and we're going to be getting this. The experience of all of that work scales much differently when you're doing it for 10,000 versus 10 people. Not that the 10 readers aren't critically important, but you have to kind of measure the work against that,
Absolutely.
So we hope that you have enjoyed these lessons about, it seemed like it was worth talking about the fact that everybody makes mistakes. We're all in this together. And hopefully you can, learn a thing or two from the different things that we've done and what has worked, what hasn't worked. The podcast in this case, which is the one that we started with, has worked brilliantly. Applause to me.
Oh, absolutely. And know that if you ever reach out to us and we give you some constructive feedback, hopefully if you've heard the show, you'll go, no, they're serious about this. I should really take this to heart.
we are very serious about your success, or we wouldn't be spending the time recording these shows. So I hope that you've learned a ton. We welcome show ideas, feedback, and we also love reviews. I check reviews all the time, wherever you listen to podcasts. And if Apple does not make it easy to post a review. So if you're having a hard time, you're welcome just to email us, and our contact information is in the show notes, and send us your review. Thank you so much for listening. Bye-bye.